The day Marlo Vance paid a struggling single father $50,000 to pretend to be her husband, neither of them realized that 90 days later, she would stand outside his small house holding a new contract worth far more than money, with trembling hands and tears in her eyes, asking him to marry her for real. But before that moment could ever happen, she had to learn that the man she hired to protect her reputation was the first person who had ever truly seen her heart. And he had to discover that the powerful woman who seemed to have everything was quietly terrified of losing the one thing money could never buy. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you can stay part of our family and our community. Marlo was 34, the youngest CEO in the history of a rapidly growing American technology company, and the kind of woman whose photograph appeared on business magazines while other executives twice her age stood behind her applauding. She wore tailored suits, spoke with confidence, and could walk into a boardroom full of wealthy investors without letting a single person see her hands trembling beneath the table. To the outside world, she was fearless. Behind closed doors, she was exhausted. Her company was preparing for the largest investment deal of its history, but one condition had quietly been attached to the deal by an old-fashioned investment group: they wanted stability, family, and a leader who appeared grounded enough to protect the company for decades. Marlo hated the condition, but she needed the investment. Worse, a rival executive had begun spreading rumors that she was emotionally unstable and too consumed by work to be trusted with the future of the company. The board demanded that she show a different side of herself before the final vote. Then came the scandal that pushed her into desperation. A photograph of Marlo leaving a charity event alone was published beside an article claiming that she was secretly involved in a bitter personal dispute with one of her investors. The story was false, but the damage was real. Her board wanted answers, investors wanted reassurance, and the rival who had been waiting for her to stumble suddenly had ammunition. Marlo's legal advisor suggested a temporary marriage arrangement could silence the rumors and demonstrate stability until the investment closed. She hated the idea, but desperation has a way of making impossible choices look reasonable. That was how she found Callum Mercer. Callum was 38 and lived in a modest rented house on the edge of town with his 8-year-old daughter, Elsie. 3 years earlier, he had lost his wife after a sudden illness, and since then he had built his entire life around his daughter. He worked repairing commercial equipment during the day, took whatever extra jobs he could find, packed Elsie's lunches every morning, helped with her schoolwork, and carefully counted every dollar before paying a bill. He had never been wealthy, but he had something Marlo's world seemed to have forgotten how to produce: peace. Callum initially thought the offer was a joke. Marlo explained the arrangement with uncomfortable precision. 90 days. Public appearances. A legal marriage. Separate finances. No emotional expectations. When the investment deal was complete, they would quietly divorce. The payment would be enough for Callum to clear his debts, repair his aging home, and create a college fund for Elsie. He stared at the contract for several seconds before asking only one question: whether his daughter would be protected from the publicity. Marlo immediately said yes. That answer surprised him. He had expected her to care about the company first. Instead, she had asked her lawyers to make Elsie's privacy one of the strictest conditions in the agreement. The wedding was deliberately small and happened during the day at a quiet courthouse. There were no flowers, no celebration, and no romantic music. Marlo wore a simple cream-colored dress, while Callum wore the best suit he owned. Elsie stood beside them holding a little bouquet she had picked from her neighbor's garden. When the clerk declared them married, Marlo smiled for the cameras waiting outside, but Callum noticed something the cameras didn't capture. Her smile disappeared the instant everyone looked away. For the first few weeks, their arrangement worked exactly as planned. They attended business events together, posed for photographs, and allowed the public to believe they were happily married. Callum never demanded explanations. Marlo never asked him to pretend when the cameras were gone. But living near each other gradually revealed things neither had expected. Marlo discovered that Callum woke before sunrise every day, prepared Elsie's breakfast, checked her school bag, and left encouraging notes inside her lunchbox. She saw how carefully he listened when his daughter talked, even when she spent 10 minutes explaining something that had happened during recess. She noticed the way he repaired broken toys instead of throwing them away and how he kept an old photograph of his late wife in a drawer, not because he was unable to move forward, but because he believed remembering someone was not the same as refusing to live. Callum, meanwhile, discovered that Marlo often skipped meals when stressed, carried her responsibilities like punishment, and never allowed herself to admit when something hurt. He noticed that she became unusually quiet whenever anyone mentioned parents or family. He eventually learned that Marlo's father had died when she was young and that her mother had spent years blaming Marlo for choosing business over family, even though Marlo had sacrificed nearly everything to build the company her father had started. One afternoon, Elsie came home from school upset because another child had made fun of her for having only one parent. Callum tried to comfort her, but before he could finish, Marlo quietly sat beside the little girl. She didn't offer a business-like solution. She didn't tell Elsie to ignore the comments. Instead, she told her that families were not measured by how many people stood in a photograph, but by how many people stayed when life became difficult. Callum looked at Marlo differently after that. The woman he had assumed was cold had just revealed a tenderness she rarely allowed anyone to see. As the weeks passed, their fake marriage began to feel dangerously real. Marlo started coming home early enough to eat dinner with Callum and Elsie. Callum began leaving coffee on the kitchen counter for her without being asked. Elsie started calling Marlo by a nickname she had invented herself, and Marlo secretly loved it. They laughed together. They disagreed. They learned each other's habits. And without realizing it, they began building something no contract had ever required. Then everything collapsed. 2 weeks before the 90-day deadline, Marlo's rival, Grant Holloway, obtained evidence that the marriage had originally been arranged. He leaked the information to the board and the media. Within hours, headlines accused Marlo of deceiving investors and using a poor single father as a paid husband. Reporters surrounded the company building. Investors threatened to withdraw. Board members demanded that Marlo resign. Callum became the easiest person to blame. Marlo was furious, but not because the arrangement had been exposed. She was furious because Grant had discovered Callum's financial problems and was using them to make him look like a man who had sold himself for money. Callum's dignity was being destroyed publicly, and Marlo knew she had brought him into this world. The board offered her one way out. She could publicly declare that Callum had manipulated her, announce the marriage was a mistake, and distance herself from him. If she did, the investment might survive. Callum knew exactly what that meant. He quietly told Marlo that she should do it. She refused at first, but Callum reminded her that he had entered the arrangement for Elsie's future, not for his own pride. He didn't want Marlo to destroy the company she had spent her life building because she felt guilty about him. That afternoon, Callum packed his daughter's things and left. Marlo watched from the doorway as the only man who had ever made her feel safe walked away because he believed her future mattered more than his own heart. For the first time in years, Marlo cried without hiding. But the story did not end there. Instead of blaming Callum, Marlo decided to investigate Grant's claims herself. She discovered that the leaked documents had been altered. The payment to Callum had been real, but Grant had removed the sections showing that Marlo had protected Elsie's privacy, covered Callum's legal expenses, and refused to let anyone use his financial struggles against him. More importantly, she discovered that Grant had secretly manipulated several company accounts to make it appear that Marlo had approved illegal transfers. Marlo could have quietly saved herself by blaming Callum. Instead, she exposed the entire scheme publicly. The board meeting that followed lasted for hours, but by the end of it, Grant had been removed, the investment group withdrew its demand for a manufactured family image, and Marlo remained CEO. More importantly, she finally admitted something she had spent her whole life avoiding. She had been so afraid of losing control that she had confused control with strength. She could rebuild a company. She could not rebuild a heart after breaking it. The 90-day contract expired. Marlo signed the divorce papers alone. Then she did something no one expected. She walked away from the boardroom and went to find Callum. 90 days after the day they had first signed their marriage contract, Marlo arrived at Callum's modest home in the middle of the afternoon. There was no security team, no luxury car surrounded by assistants, and no photographers. She stood at his door carrying a simple folder. Callum opened it and found a new contract. This one had no 90-day deadline. It had no payment. It had no clauses about public appearances. It had no exit strategy. Instead, it contained promises about honesty, patience, family, forgiveness, and choosing each other even when life became difficult. Callum looked at her, confused and emotional. Marlo finally admitted that the first marriage had been a transaction, but somewhere between Elsie's lunchbox notes and the quiet dinners, between arguments and laughter, between fear and forgiveness, she had fallen in love with him. She told him she wasn't asking him to marry the CEO of a powerful company. She was asking him to marry the woman who had learned how to come home. Callum looked down at the contract and then at Marlo. He reminded her that real marriage couldn't be bought, negotiated, or guaranteed by legal language. Marlo nodded through her tears. That was when Callum smiled and told her that perhaps the best contract was the one neither of them needed to sign. Elsie appeared behind him, holding the little bouquet she had kept from their courthouse wedding. The flowers were dry and faded, but she had carefully preserved them. Marlo covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Callum reached for her hand. This time, there were no cameras. No investors. No board members. No money. Just 3 people standing in the afternoon light, choosing one another freely. Months later, Marlo's company became stronger than ever, but she changed the way she led it. She stopped measuring success only by revenue and headlines. She created family support programs for employees, expanded paid leave, and established a scholarship fund for children who had lost parents. Callum continued his repair business, eventually expanding it into a successful company of his own. He never stopped being the father who packed lunches, fixed broken toys, and listened carefully to every story Elsie told. And Marlo never stopped being grateful for the man she had once hired to pretend to love her. Because Callum had taught her something no executive coach, lawyer, or investor ever could. Sometimes the greatest love story begins with a lie, not because the lie was beautiful, but because 2 broken people were given enough time to discover the truth. The truth was that Callum never needed Marlo's money. Marlo never needed Callum's name. They needed someone who would stay. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. And before we say goodbye, leave a meaningful comment telling us this: do you believe a relationship can begin from the wrong reasons and still grow into something completely real? Sometimes life gives us people through circumstances we never would have chosen, only to reveal that they were exactly the people our hearts needed. Marlo thought she was paying a stranger to become her husband for 90 days. Instead, she found a family, a home, and the courage to become someone capable of receiving love. And Callum thought he was accepting money to play a temporary role. Instead, he discovered that some promises are worth more when they are made freely, without a signature, without a deadline, and without a price.